Awesome. Hey, welcome. My name is Henry Been. I'm here all the way from the Netherlands. Thank you for having me. It's my privilege to talk to you about identity and access management. However, before I start, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I know you're not here for the talk. You're here for free shit, right? So, I got a number of things for you. First of all, a while ago, I wrote a book together with one of the other speakers here today, Erwin Staal, and Eduard Kelholtz, still in the Netherlands. Luckily, he isn't here. And I got 2 codes that I can give away to people that want the e-copy of this book. So, if you're interested, come find me afterwards, and I will find some idiotic way to make sure that only 2 people get a code. I also have access to Pluralsight trial codes. So, if you want a trial account on Pluralsight, want to have access for a while, come find me. I can get those for you as well. I also have Pluralsight socks, but I gave those all away except for 1 pair, which you really don't want. And if you don't get any of those and still want more or less free stuff, you can use this code to buy any Manning book up to December 2nd. All right, so fulfilling that obligation, let's talk about how I designed access to resources in Azure, Entra ID, and Azure DevOps for engineering teams. And from my point of view, which is mostly focused on Microsoft technology-oriented conferences, so I hope it goes the same for you, a lot of talks are about new shining technology. Hey, this is Azure Container Apps, it's awesome, and you can do this. Or, hey, this is a new feature in Kafka, and you can do this. This is not going to be that talk. This is going to be more of a use case study. I'm going to tell you about some of the problems that I have encountered and how I solve those using technologies. And I'm going to focus mostly on the design and not on the technology. It's a type of talk that I enjoy, and I hope you as well. This is based on lessons learned across a number of customers that I've worked for. So if you're a smart ass, you can go to LinkedIn and find some of the customers that I've worked for. Don't try to conclude that it's for one of them. This is a mix and match across a number of customers. So let's add a little bit of structure to this talk, because I think that's going to help. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to talk about the challenge. Which are the problems that I see and that we're going to solve? I'm going to talk about some of the requirements, things that I find important in a design like this. Then I'm going to talk you through the solution that I chose. And there are a number of parts here. Some technology, Microsoft technology, that I use in my day-to-day job, but it's probably going to generalize to other similar solutions as well. Most importantly, the design. And finally, I'd like to share how we fared. Did it work out as planned? And I appreciate people taking pictures. I can send you the slides afterwards as well. Don't worry. All right, what's the challenge? Basically, we have engineers in our company and they want to get access to stuff to do their job. And there is an important trade-off here. First of all, we have those engineers. And ideally, they all want to be global administrator because they have never stopped in their work. They don't make mistakes. Trust me, bro. This is going to work out very well. This is like the stance of your average engineer. And spoiler alert, I'm an engineer. At the other end is, I want to prevent unauthorized access. I want to make sure that that engineer doesn't by accident remove the production database. Never done that yet. This is a very difficult conversation to have, right? Don't you trust me? Why can't I have access to this? You know, I'm a very responsible engineer, yada, 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 and all those kinds of lies, honestly. This conversation is a lot easier if you don't talk about not trusting the engineer. You talk about not trusting the person that steals access to their identity. If my account, which you saw Henry at Azure Specialist.nl, gets compromised, ideally, you cannot do anything. And that's where designs like this come in. So it's not about not trusting people. This is a great point to pivot any conversation. So when it comes to access management in organizations, I think there are 2 types of organizations that I can distinguish between. And of course, these are extremes on a scale. And the first one is the more traditional, large enterprise organization. And the other one is what I have dubbed developer-only organizations. So by traditional organizations, I mean large enterprises. Think of a bank and all the problems that come with banks. And developer-only organizations, think of 6 engineers, fresh out of school, solving problems for the customers. YOLO. All right, so in those enterprises, if you look at how access is provided to engineers, and I'm going to assume Entra ID, but this is probably more or less the same for an LDAP kind of system or whatever you're using, it's very complex. We don't give access to users. Instead, we give access to stuff to groups. But we don't put users in those groups. We put groups in those groups, in which we put 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 groups, etc. Like the internet is cutting out, and then finally we put in users. This is a very complex structure that in the end no one comprehends, but for reasons unknown works, and you should not touch. Now the problem here is that it's working, right? Nobody is complaining, don't touch it. However, there are more problems than making sure that people have the access they need. People should not have the access they don't need. And one of the reasons is that people move to another position in the company. So you want to revoke the rights they currently have because they don't need them anymore. Or even worse, people leave the company. And if you don't deactivate their account immediately, you should at least revoke access to stuff they don't need access to anymore. Now the problem here is that user group membership is rarely reviewed. And if you don't do that, this whole cascade of permissions is not revoked. This is getting more and more attention lately. The problem is this. Grouping group nesting is even rarer reviewed. And in many enterprises, this results in people having access to stuff for years, while they shouldn't. Now, the YOLO kind of guys. This works completely different. Here, authorizations are not assigned under the governance of some elaborate design. It's just like, yo, dude, I need access to the database because I just got a call, stuff isn't working. Sure, I see you, I know you, we've been working for years, here you go. And that's the end of it. It's never revoked, standing access to production, and stuff, works out pretty well in reality. But there is no governance, no design, no review, no auditing of who has access to what and why. And you can see how this becomes a problem the second stuff hits the fan. So these are 2 extremes. Now, I believe we can devise some kind of reasoning about how to provide access to stuff within our organization that works in these 2 extremes. And I've worked in both extremes, maybe not to the extent that I'm, sketching right now, but I've done this in both kinds of organizations. So how do we want to provide access to resources instead? Okay, a number of things that I find important. Engineers should have or very easily acquire permissions and authorizations that they require to do their job. There is no good reason to pay somebody an awesome amount of money and then prevent them from doing their work. I'm now talking about all the shitty laptops you get from your employer instead of the fancy ones, for example. Access is another one. I need to be provable in control of who has access to what. And not just that, but also why. Justifications of authorizations is very important if you start talking about things like healthcare, fintech, government. Ask offering. This is my pet peeve. Permissions to anything should be given out not by that grumpy old dude in the basement, but by the product owner, asset owner, for crying out loud, even a project manager if you have those, but not by a sysadmin. Why is it that one person, who apparently knows a lot about IT, decides who can access what? Because giving somebody access is a business decision. It involves risk. Also opportunity, but also risk. That decision should be taken by the business. And ideally, I want them to make that decision and have it automatically effected by our systems. I want to be compliant with ISO 27001. First of all, because it's very easy if you want to get certified, but also it is a pretty good standard if you want to have some kind of bar in your organization. And I want this to be understandable. I want to draw a physio diagram of how it works, give that to the architect that enters the company when I leave. This actually happened a couple of months ago. And I want him to say, and I quote, "Henry, shut up for a second. Yep, I can work with this." End of knowledge transfer. And in my case, I wanted this to work with Microsoft Entra ID, the Azure Cloud, and Azure DevOps, which is my stack, which is where I work, but I'm confident this will generalize. So how did I go about it? Now, before I dive into this, any questions? Are we all on board? Critiques? Nothing. All right. There are three things that I want to put together. The first one is access packages. This is a very specific offering that's available in Entra ID, and I will dive deeper into this in a bit, but who's familiar with access packages already? It is freaking awesome, right? Yes, okay, I will enlighten all of you in a bit. The second one is privileged identity management, and I think more people know about this feature. Yeah, it's getting a lot of traction, I think, over the last year or 2 years, maybe. Microsoft is actually pushing it a lot as well, and I think rightfully so. And the third thing is we're going to need some kind of design on how we put these things together. Now let's start with a very quick recap of privileged identity management. Normally, when you get access to something in Entra ID or in the Azure environment, you get a role assignment. Either an RBAC role assignment in Azure or an Entra ID role assignment in Entra ID. And the second you get that assignment, you can do all the things that come with that authorization. And when you lose it, well, you lose access, right? What PIM does, it creates a different state of that assignment that you get by default, which means you're not assigned, you're eligible for assignment. And then you have to do some kind of magic jump through a hoop to actually get the assignment. And ideally, that hoop is just an extra MFA challenge. Or something like you can only do this from the company network. Something that is required for the higher privilege you're wanting to activate. And then you can make rules like automatically deactivate after 24 hours. The benefit here is that if my identity gets compromised, one way, they want to move to that higher privilege, they're going to be challenged with this extra requirement before getting that privilege. So this is one of the things that a lot of companies start implementing. The other one is access packages. Now, an access package is a construct in Entra ID, which has things like a name and a description. I have very strong opinions about descriptions. You use those when your names suck. And then under an access package, you can add one or more resources, things that you should get access to when you are a holder of this access package. For example, group membership, group ownership, applications, pardon my French, SharePoint sites. But it's not just that, because that's a thing we can already do with groups. You can also attach what are called request rules. There will be more things added to this slide in a bit. Request rules define under which conditions somebody can request access to this access package. For example, you need to be already a member of this group, or you cannot be a guest in the organization. You need to be an actual user. Then there are approval rules. Sometimes approval is automatically, but it can also be that your manager needs to approve, or that a very specific user or group needs to approve. And then lifecycle rules. This is the bomb. Here you can specify things like membership should automatically expire every 3 months. Or an access review should be done every 3 months to ensure that only people that still need the permission have it. I just said that stupid slide. So that's the latest animation. Who wants to see access packages in practice? Thought so. I just didn't want to do only PowerPoint. By the way, I'm Dutch. I think there are a number of things that you know about the Dutch. We wear wooden shoes. We have a lot of meals, but we're very cheap. That's true. I bought this image 6 years ago for my very first presentation. It was €5. But I figured if I still use it every single presentation, per slide, it gets cheaper. All right, access packages. So this is the Azure portal, still the place that I use to access Entra ID. There is also this new portal that I try to ignore for as long as I can. And I go to Microsoft Entra ID, and then I find identity governance, and here on the left I find access packages. Now, bit of a bummer. In all honesty, you're going to need a P2 license to use these features. More and more companies start getting P2 licenses because of all the other security features. But if you don't, and you cannot find this button or it doesn't work, sorry. At some point, you will need to pay. Now, let's create a new access package. We're going to give this the name demo, of course. Descriptions suck. The catalog is just a grouping thing so that you can segregate access. And of course, I have a test catalog. Now, I can now start adding resources to this access package. Let's add a group, for example, sales and marketing, for which you become cursed with membership when you take this access package. And the second demo group sounds fantastic, of which you become a owner. I can add applications, so now I can find any application in my Entra ID. Let's not do this, let's take this one. And then I can even specify which role I get on that application. And of course, you can now even add Microsoft Entra ID roles. However, in all honesty, you're going to require a P3 license, which Microsoft conveniently called Entra ID governance. So let's not do that. Next up, I can specify all kinds of request rules. I'm not going to browse through all of them, but I hope you're going to agree with me. There is a lot of configuration that I can do here. You can make this pretty complicated if you want to, but I firmly believe if you're going to need more than one approval for something, ask yourself, is this really necessary? Or am I just doing as I am told? I can specify a specific group which needs to do approval or users, etc. I can add a number of questions that people need to answer before they get access. I can force them to put in a Jira ticket number. I can even add a regular expression to verify that the incident number starts with Inc. if you're a ServiceNow user. You can really make people hate you. I can specify access reviews, which of course I want to do weekly because I really want to make people hate me. Now, I hope you can see how I walk through this. Create, and a few minutes later, my access package is created. Now, once this is in place, I can go to, and we're talking Microsoft, right? So the first thing you do when you start a new project in Microsoft is you do create a new portal. This portal is myaccess.microsoft.com. And what you can do here is you can find a list of access packages that you can request. So I find one. This is one I created before. I request access, get coffee, press continue. I don't know how to do my job. So I did this thing, right? And now I submit a request. Within 30 seconds or so, the approver gets an email saying, hey, you need to review this request. And then it becomes under approvals. And I should have one pending because I'm well prepared. And I can either accept or decline this. That's how access packages work in practice. All aboard? All right, let's go back to my favorite architecture tool, PowerPoint. Now, I want to take you on a train of thought on how you can divide your organization in parts and provide access to resources associated with those parts. And that sounds very fake, but please try to follow along. If you lose the trail of thought at some point, just shout out and we step a little bit back. Okay, first thought. Everybody in the organization involved in software engineering has a pretty clear role that they fulfill when it comes to that software product. For example, you are either the product owner, an engineer, or a stakeholder. People that want shit, people that build shit, and people that talk about it. Now, if we look very closely at this, I think we're going to need to split the engineer into two parts. Engineer non-production and engineer production. I have access to production resources, dangerous, sometimes needed, and my day-to-day job. I think this is a segregation that almost organizations make now. So I hope we can agree on those four roles. Second thought. If I work in a larger organization, I don't have that role on everything. I can divide my software, architecture, landscape, whatever you call, into multiple parts. And I like calling those products. A combination of services, application components, and some infrastructural resources. I don't know, the ordering system, the HR system, by the way, humans are no resources, the CRM, etc. Or maybe something you build. Product 1, Product 2, and Product 3 are very bad examples of names, but I hope they give you the picture. I start dividing my landscape. Now, what if we create an access package for every combination of a product and a role? Something like this. Maybe for product 1, I'm an engineer. For product 2, I'm the product owner, and I really need stuff from product 3, so there I become a stakeholder. And then we can start defining what those authorizations mean. We're also going to need one very special role. The role that we all want but don't get is that of administrator, which is a role you have not on just one product, but on all products. Basically, it means that you're God within the scope of this organization's IT infrastructure. The next part that we're going to do is we're going to use Entra ID groups as placeholders for a group of authorizations in a target system. I think this is a familiar concept. For example, we're going to create a group called All Products, Entra ID, Global Administrator. All Products, Azure DevOps, and then Organization Administrator. This is a very specific role in Azure DevOps. And in Azure, we're going to create one which is called Root Management Group Owner. And I hope you see a pattern here. Product, so the product in my organization that this relates to. Target system, the system where I get an authorization. And then target system authorizations, which authorizations I have in that system. And we can use groups this way to pretty well describe which authorizations you get without me having to look into that system to see how this is implemented. And I find this important because now within Entra ID, I can get an integral look at everybody's authorizations. We're going to add one very special group for all products, Entra ID, Access Package Approver. This means that everybody who is in this group will be getting the permissions to approve access package requests for all products. And now we can start combining those with the access packages we created. For example, for the package All Product Administrator, we're going to say, if you hold that access package, you're going to be a member of these 3 groups we just talked about. And then on that first group, we're going to assign the role Global Administrator within Entra ID. And I recommend you to make that an eligible assignment, not active. Then we're going to log into Azure DevOps, and we're going to make that second group a member of the Project Collection Administrators group in Azure DevOps. And for the third one, we're going to create an RBAC assignment within our Azure environment. And finally, we're going to configure a bit of a, let's call it a bootstrap loop at the top, where we say, hey, if you're an administrator, you can approve the creation of new administrators. And when we start implementing this design, at the very start, we're going to do a manual intervention and create the first administrator. Myself, of course. Now, it's important to realize here that we're now not talking about one system anymore. We're talking about 3 systems. Some of these things live in Entra ID, some of them live in Azure DevOps, and some of them live in Azure. However, if we only look at the part on the left, we still should be able to get a pretty good idea of what authorizations come with this access package. Everybody on board so far? Okay, that's the first. Nice. You're a very smart audience. And we can start expanding on this pattern. For example, we can create an access package, product X, and then product owner. So the role product owner on that product. If you get that access package, you become a member of a group Azure DevOps product owner and a group Azure Cost Reader. For some reason, POs always want to know what stuff costs. And the best way for them to get that information is to teach them how to find it themselves and then give them the permissions to do so. So for the first one, to give the correct permissions in Azure DevOps, if you're using a team project in Azure DevOps, per product, it's very simple. Just make them project administrator. However, if you follow, I think, long-standing advice from Microsoft and the IAM Rangers on Azure DevOps, and you're going with one team project to rule them all, this is going to be a little bit more difficult. You have to assign a lot of very specific ACLs in Azure DevOps. If that just sounded like a lot of mumbo-jumbo, ignore it. But if you are in this corner and you want to know more, I have very elaborate physio diagrams. Come find me after the talk. But the thing is, in Azure DevOps, we're going to make sure that members of that group get the permissions they need in Azure DevOps. And in Azure, we're going to create an RBAC assignment on both our production and non-production subscriptions for Cost Reader. And we're going to say, if you are a product owner, you can make more product owners. And by the way, at this point, I always recommend people to have at least 2 product owners, which is a bit weird, but every product owner needs a replacement, because when they are on holiday, they don't want to approve an emergency request. They want somebody else to do it. But make agreements on who takes the role and when. For stakeholder, we can do the same, and I think from here on, it's a bit of a repetition. I just included the slides for people that want them afterwards. Now, I can do the same for engineer non-production, and this is interesting here because we're going to differentiate between non-production and production. I can create groups that might not surprise you: Azure DevOps Engineer and Azure Non-Production Read-Write. For the first one, again, I'm going to create the correct ACLs. And for the second one, I'm going to assign contributor on all the subscriptions marked as non-production that are related to this product. Now, there's a very important assumption I make here, and that's that if you're using Azure, you're using it according to the CAF, meaning subscription democratization, meaning that you have a lot of subscriptions, ideally 1 subscription per workload, so 1 subscription for each application environment. If you don't have this, you can read non-subscription resource groups, and I highly recommend you to transition to subscription democratization. Contributor, not owner, because we don't want engineers to be able to assign authorizations outside of this design. This also means that probably you're going to have to give your pipeline owner permissions, because if you're working with things like managed identities, or you need another way to give compute elements access to, for example, a database, you will need owner permissions in Azure. But give that to your pipeline, not to your engineers, because your pipeline probably has approvals, reviews, and all those policies in place. And on the production subscriptions in Azure, we're going to give another assignment, and that assignment is Reader. I firmly believe that every engineer working on the system should have access to that production environment. Few logs, few cost information, few monitoring, logging, all the shebang. You might be worried a little bit that they now also have access to the data, but that's not true. A couple of years ago already, Microsoft segregated all the data plane read actions out of this Reader role. So people with this role, Reader, can only access the control plane. They can see the database configuration, they can see the database logs, but they cannot see the data in the database. This is very important to explain to your CISO if he doesn't know this yet, because otherwise there's going to be hell. And here we're not going to have a bootstrap, but we're going to say, hey, the product owner can approve requests for this role, and this satisfies my very personal pet peeve. For the engineer production role, we're just going to have 1 group, Azure Production, and we're going to have an owner assignment on our production subscriptions. 2 things here. First of all, I deliberately segregate this to be the most minimal permission, so that I encourage people to request non-production to do their job and not just use the production authorization. And the second one is, you might be wondering, why owner here? Well, if you get up at 2 a.m. and you find that the application is not working because the compute element doesn't have access to the database, you do want to be able to fix that as an engineer. So here, I believe engineers, Dinner's ready. Yeah, I know. I think I have 10 minutes left. Yeah, okay. So ignore the timer, like all good speakers do. But I think this is important so that engineers in production can troubleshoot permission issues as well. And again, we're going to put in the PO as approver. And I added this as a note because I sometimes confuse even myself. Any questions up to this point? Critiques? Worries? Yeah, finally, go for it. All right, I see there is a mic in the room, but let me repeat the question. The question is, if you assign permissions to the pipeline, is there like an eligible and active possibility there as well? To the best of my knowledge, you cannot do an eligible assignment on a system identity, so that's a managed identity or a service principal or a federated identity. And I don't see that as a necessity in the systems that I've designed, because I protect the service connections in Azure DevOps, which encapsulate this identity with approvals. So for me, this hasn't become a requirement. I'm not saying it's never a requirement, but it hasn't been for me. I've been able to convince people in charge that I had sufficient control. But it's a very interesting point of view. Come find me if you're still worried. Other questions? All right. Then let me share what our experiences have been. I have implemented this in 3 organizations up to now. 1 developer-only organization, 1 organization with a very high risk profile within the Netherlands, and 1 pretty large enterprise, which in my point of view, not a very high risk level, but they don't agree. All right. So what were the experiences? Let's start with something positive. First of all, the PO is now in control of who has access to the stuff that belongs to their product. Me happy, very important. It's a workable solution for engineers. So this requesting of an access package and waiting for approval can be a little bit of a nuisance. I agree, but we will always need to have something to guard access to stuff. So there is always going to be a little bit of a bump, and I think this is a very minimal bump. And because we implemented this very thoroughly in at least the latest organization that I worked with, we now also saw that people came into the company and that their manager requested access packages on their behalf the day before they came in, and they could start working on day 1. Because we now have insight into all the stuff that you need to work on a certain product. We are provable in control of authorizations. All the requests, approvals, denies, reviews, everything is logged in the Entra ID activity logs. So you can find everything, and all the justifications that you put in are there as well. So you can put monitoring in place, and maybe you can search for things like duh, or a justification which is just 1 character long, and find people to hit with words. Like I said, justifications are logged. Another important thing is that privilege escalation is always logged. This is very interesting. How often do we need write access to the production environment? This is a great indicator of quality as well. Access reviews are enforced. I have now a technical means that forces my POs to every 3 months re-acknowledge that people need access to this resource. They can ignore it, but then everybody loses access, and that will be very quickly rectified. But people will not keep access they don't need anymore. And since, I think, a year ago, we started extending this system to also provide access to our end users, at least for applications that are used within the organization, so not outside of the organization. And we also started connecting other systems, even on-prem systems. So this is extendable. Is it perfect? No, it's not. And there are a number of things that still bug us. The first one is that review results are not immediate, meaning that if I revoke access for somebody, it takes till the end of the access review before that's effected. We once had somebody leave the team, and the product owner just declined access in the access review, and we found out it took 2 weeks to effect. That's very important to know if somebody leaves your team under less favorable conditions. Multiple reviewers cannot see each other's actions. So we have 2 reviewers on everything because of holiday or sickness or whatever. And the problem here is that one of those is very thorough, and he spent 40 minutes searching for an access request that was already approved by the other person. So some kind of synchron communication or whatever is required there, because you cannot see each other's actions in the portal. This is a bit of a pain in the backside. There is no support for app registrations as a resource that you provide access to. If you're into Entra ID, as I am, you probably watch this talk and are like, yeah, I think we have all of the resources we... app registrations. I'm sorry, no support yet. And that yet, by the way, is just a hope, not something that I know. Approvers cannot revoke authorizations immediately. Again, if you have to fire somebody on the spot for something they did that really can't pass, you still have to get them in that office, revoke all of their permissions manually as an administrator, wait 60 minutes before you let them go. And that's all I had to share. The only thing left for me is please try this at home. I do love tinkering with technology, and I want to encourage you to do the same. Don't break your computer, or if you break a computer, make sure it's not yours. And to do so, I want to point you towards something, one thing, and that is, if you look very closely here at the top right, you can see that I'm not logged in with my own user account. Instead, I'm logged in with something incomprehensible.onmicrosoft.com. This is called a Microsoft 365 developer tenant. This is a thing that you can request to get a Microsoft Entra ID environment with a number of pre-provisioned users, SharePoint sites, groups, and a number of other things, where you can just tinker around. Now, the program is currently on pause because there has been a lot of misuse, but I eyeball it every now and then, and as soon as it goes off pause again, grab one of those so you have an environment to play around. If they ever pause it again, they will keep renewing existing environments, so just try to grab one of those. So that's a tip that I hope that helps you. Now, this is a new thing. I tried this on Session Eyes. If you have any comments or things, I don't know, that you want to tell me where I sucked or where I did great, please let me know. If you drop anything with a comment and a question and you leave an email address or something, I will try to get back to you. Otherwise, reach out on LinkedIn, send me email, Twitter, Tinder, whatever. I'm married, by the way. I want to say that it's just, sorry, it's a Dutch joke to include Tinder. Don't take anything out of it. Thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, feel free to leave. Thank you.